Start off the war with Poland having an interesting piece in their hand that they picked up from the random events. A forced peace. Now, this is a useful thing if somehow this war against Sweden doesn't work well, but they were seriously considering playing it on France to free up, essentially. Well, everyone would then be at war with Sweden, right? But that could be fixed very quickly. I'm sure England and Spain are not terribly interested in a war with Sweden, but Prussia is. So maybe that war wouldn't be able to be ended, but perhaps the war against Holland could be started if the French aren't involved. But that event did not happen, so they chose not to play it. They're holding on to it. To some extent, if things go very badly for them, it's a very helpful thing to knock out their main aggressor or whatever. I had mistaken Sweden's structure. It's actually two. They have two fleets there. I can't count everybody's. I'm just assuming my numbers are correct, but they may not be. I haven't taken care of the prestige announcements yet. Nobody built a new ship. The Holland tried to. In fact, Holland is making tremendous amounts of money, but not as much, not enough to get them the high competition value, but they did have enough to try to buy an extra ship. Now, this is the period of Holland's historical decline, so they no longer have a minister, a navy minister. And what we're going to see is countries like England are probably going to get one, and maybe, well, France has one that hasn't really been helping, which will improve their chances of building new commercial fleets and winning the competitions. Another thing that I note here is if this ends up a commercial war, that opens up new opportunities to the people not at war, because not a straight commerce war, but if there's privateering going on, that opens up new opportunities because the slots start emptying out. So the people who are still there get higher profits. It doesn't fully explain the high profit margins of a wartime trading, but it does at least give some improvement there, which is kind of a cool aspect that I hadn't really thought about before. All right, we'll get the prestige gains. Holland paid double, and they're good. And biggest, so they're going to get 2 spaces. England paid the next. They paid double. I don't know why I'm doing this live, but so they go up 1. France paid normal. Spain paid normal. Sweden paid $1, so they don't have a penalty, but they have they didn't make any money this turn, but they have a chance of failure on a 6, and they're okay. Not much in the diplomacy side of things. You know, some thoughts: could Sweden get out of the war, etc. Turkey, are they interested in an invasion of Spanish territory in Italy? In particular, actually, an attack on Rome is appealing. While Europe's at war, the danger, of course, being that other people might turn against me. But that's appealing. I believe I have claim to Rome. I have claim to all the Italian states. I didn't want to go against Spain. That would have put too much. The problem here, though, with Rome is that means that I'd be thrown into, if I'm left alone, that's fine. But let's say Spain attacks, declares war. The Spanish Navy is sufficient to stomp me. The English Navy is probably big enough to handle Sweden and France, and maybe some Spanish aid there. So I don't see much help with that unless, for some reason I could convince Holland to join in, which isn't going to happen. What about Venice? Who owns them? The Spanish own Venice right now. Now, that's actually kind of appealing because the Venetian territories are close to me. And then I'm not dealing with a naval alliance. I got to think a little bit more. I jumped right in there, but I think that's an appealing prospect to try to expand into the Italian territories at this point. And that might even things up a little bit for France at least. Sweden's in a lot of trouble. That's the problem. If I had made that choice in an earlier turn, that would have been okay. But at this point, I can't really do it. I can't start a war just against Venice. I can, however, ally with France with the intention of entering into this war, but that's a risky proposition because it could throw me into this war as well. No, it wouldn't, because I would have the opportunity. Yeah, I'm gonna see. Nah, I'm gonna hold out a bit. Okay, so we'll stay with where we were and go to the royal income phase, or royal phase, where we built the armies and pay for everything. In terms of economics, there were still money going from Holland to France, allowed France to build its cav this time. Nobody's exceeding their recruitment limits. Nobody's willing to give money to Austria. You'd think England might be willing to, but there's not a lot that they can do. If things get worse, they may end up floating Austria money because Austria's got a big army, potentially. They can't build it really fast, though. A couple of event chits were played. France tried to assassinate the English monarch. That would have caused kind of chaos because he's also the Dutch monarch. There is, this danger of the Dutch. If things start going really well for the French, the Dutch will switch sides, right? They've just been funding France. They haven't made any formal alliances there. I looked up. They had a secret police which could have affected things. Shit. I forgot to do I wanted to do this against France. It's a peasant revolt. I just can never remember, all the events that are out. It's the same kind of problem that I'd have in a big multiplayer card-driven type game. The players holding the control over the events makes it bad for solitaire for me. It's not too bad when it's only 2 players, but like Russia mostly is. But when you've got all these players, and no place to keep the good shits, and keeping them on the board, that just makes it easier for me to notice it, but it's still not easy. So France started this whole war situation. Therefore, they have the choice. They have initiative. They get to choose where they want to go. They chose to go first in the naval phase and slipped out. Well, the French only have 5 ships in their fleet. The Swedes left 1 behind. Because you have advantages if you have an admiral, which both of them do. The Swedes got a random one. And you have a small fleet, 5 ships or less. You get bonuses on a lot of different activities. And they slipped out to do privateering, mainly because they can't face the English or Spanish fleet in open battle. The English have a navy, have an admiral and a larger fleet. They only have 1 admiral. I left James on there accidentally. He should have been king and dead by now, or exiled by now. Now the Allied response has to come out of this, and it's kind of hard to decide what to do. Certainly some privateering seems reasonable here in the Med, and perhaps there are some Swedish fleets as well. It's hard to block the sea lanes. It really is. At least as far as I can tell, that the English Channel is actually a different sea. It's not absolutely clear. The lines don't seem to indicate it. But it's got wording on it like the other seas do. Oh, here's the division. Okay, so the Irish Sea is part of the English Channel there. But that's fine. The Swedes were able to slip around the north. Basically, in port, you're not going to catch anything you can only catch things one sea zone away, basically. And if you're in port, that's 2 sea zones to get out there. But also there's the desire to hunt down those fleets. How big a desire? Well, we don't want to lose our shipping. Let's handle the shipping. The fucking used car shop below me has a modern Mercedes that they just recently got. And since this morning, it's been going off for everything. This time the sprinklers set it off. The alarm on it. I want to go out there with a sledgehammer and give it retribution for the amount of complaining it's making. All right, so what we've got is the Spaniards sent 7 ships out to try to catch the Swedes. The English sent 5 under Russell to catch Jean Bart. Now the English have advantages beyond just an admiral in place. Let's take a look at the naval battles, because I haven't done a naval battle yet. We've just done some privateering, and so far that's been ineffectual here. The English also went privateering down in the Mediterranean. The Spanish committed their entire navy to this fight. Prussia should play too. They don't really have anything they can do, though. They'll keep their fleet at sea in port. It's safer there. Okay. All right. So the first thing that has to happen is, even though you're the moving player, you still have to intercept the enemy. So the English are going to try to intercept Jean Bart. And going through this sequence of bonuses, I don't think the English get a bonus there. Naval leaders and size is all good. Basically, I need a 4 through 6. And I succeed. So I've caught him. I'm going to take this naval battle completely. I may play out the Spanish one too if it happens, simply because it's a different kind of arrangement. So now, the English are going to be the red die, the French will be the yellow one. We get to roll for a wind gauge. And the English both have a naval leader, so they both have +1 to the die roll, so it doesn't really matter there. The English get the wind gauge. That means, like in many of these games, they get to fire first. Now, they're going to fire their ships needing a 4, 5, or 6 because they're English. And they fire basically one die per ship. Much simpler system, again, than the firepower table type systems that EU uses, I guess, but mechanically more complex. So we've got 5 ships there, and we need a 4, and we'll grab some of my bucket of dice, only dice, or whatever. Not used to using these with EU games. Okay, so I've got 4 out of 5 hits. I just waxed the French fleet. And that actually does not reduce their structure. These are just damaged or destroyed ships that the French can rebuild. I think they're $3 each. Likewise, privateering, we had a success, I think, against Sweden. That doesn't reduce the actual structure, so you can build up to it. Now the French have 1 ship back, and they hit only on a 5 or a 6. And they also got a hit on the English. Now, I'm sure we make leader loss checks here. Wouldn't make a lot of sense if we don't. 11 or 12, it's more likely. English, French. Okay. The French lost the battle, and they must return to the nearest Allied port, military port. And is there a prestige value? There is. The defeated squadron, this is a major battle with a modifier, so it's going to be a 3 PP, and this is permanent PP. Loss for France, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, let's not roll that around. And England gains up to the top. And the French have to flee somewhere. I don't think they have anything here in Africa, which makes India and Colombia adjacent, or we can flee back to France. There's an advantage to trying to keep things, over in the colonial area, but I'm not going to be able to do that. So we'll flee back to France. All right, and that's probably the end of our naval expedition. Meanwhile, the Spaniards are looking for the Swedes, but the Swedes have a smaller fleet and a leader, so they actually are subtracting 2 off the chance of the Spaniards to find it. They'll only find it on a 6, and they do not. So we're not going to see much there. And now we go to the regular land phase, which will be as normal, except, well, it's going to be more complicated because, 8 of the 10 powers are at war here. Franco-Swedish side of the turn. The French marched in here. They were intercepted by the Spaniards. They repulsed them. A victory 2-point swing. There was a lot of battles. We managed to tie a battle. Actually, there was a second attempt here that failed. Tied a battle against Lorraine, defeated it. There's no fortification there. I always forget to pay for the fortifications. This time I remembered to do it right at the end, but it's always really tough. And then it becomes tough to remember which ones did I pay for, which ones didn't I pay for. In this case, the French paid for Troyes, but and the Spaniards paid for whatever they have here. These couple, I think they paid for Flanders as well. Although it's hard to believe Brussels isn't fortified automatically. And then up in the north, a number of them were paid for. God knows what, I'll try to remember. We have sieges here. The biggie here is Lorraine. Lorraine's been destroyed now. France just took it over. This is what the policy of reunion allows. They have a claim to Lorraine. It's part of their country now. Automatic, faster than disputed regions and all that. It just switches in. The Swedes also managed to get a successful battle against the Prussians, and they're laying siege to Magdeburg. Unfortunately, up here in the Baltic, Peter didn't take the trap, as it were, and try to attack right away. He's going to build up a force. But those Swedish troops have a lot of resilience, and they can cause a great deal of damage if they're attacked, even against the Prussians. It doesn't seem like that much, 3 versus 2 to the morale thing, but if the forces are about equally distributed, they take about equal losses. So unless a leader's very good or something, you're not going to have a higher morale, and you're going to have to either choose, I'll stick around, and I'm almost guaranteed to rout then on the next round, unless it's small forces, or I'm going to pull out. I don't know how reasonable it is, this combat system, for the simple fact that, it's too unlikely. It's too likely you're going to rout if you're facing any sized opponent when you're out of morale. If you're on the 5 to 9 table, without any bonuses, the opponent's going to do a point of damage to you on a 2 or higher, and you will break, right? Okay. Well, you're already broken. You will automatically rout if you take a damage at that point, and it's a bad rout. If you withdraw and you get a rout, really all you lose is your artillery and your supply wagons. You maybe get a shot on you on the 1 to 2 table with no modifiers, which means you have 1/3 chance of losing 1 unit. But you can get mauled on a real rout. And it's just not worth it. If you're losing the battle, you pull out. That's very much appropriate, I think, once we hit a certain era. Basically from about 1700, God knows to what point we're going to call an end to that. because there was no Great War after the Wars of Frederick, the 7 Years' War, particularly. So presumably for some period after that, until maybe the early 1770s, you're going to have that pure linear combat, which this actually does seem to suit well. Maybe a little after 1700, though, because in Marlborough's age, you had all-out stand-up fights, but you didn't see too many routes. So the French, I think you still had the linear, but prior to that, you've got armies that maybe weren't following the rules quite so much and don't fit as well to this. Now, the game is supposed to be the 18th century, and to tell you the truth, as long as you ignore the Napoleonic, the Revolutionary area, the pre-Napoleonic really, but or early Napoleonic, if you want to consider the last couple of years of the century, but as long as you eliminate that, you don't have these big routes. But certainly, the nature of warfare outside of that slice, and the game does extrude a little bit outside of that space, is a little different. And it's kind of, I prefer the way that EU handles it because it can span more time. This, it feels like the focus actually is on the meat of the game, but that there are elements of strategy and elements of tactical systems in play that the game isn't designed for. I screwed up here. The Prussians lost a battle. I'm in the midst of the Prussian turn, but the Prussians lost a battle to Sweden. They have a chit here, which is basically propaganda they can make up that they won, and it'll negate the event, the prestige gains there. So for Prussia, they need a 4 or better, and they get that. So that was a 2-point battle, prestige-wise, that is in process. And at the end of the spring phase, the Allies, whatever they may be, these dual alliances that are, not working together, they failed to really attack the French, or the Swedes for that matter. They could not find them anywhere. So these big forces, well, even the Spaniards, who maybe the French would have allowed that fight, but they're worried about the Austrians, etc., and figure, well, I got reinforcements down here, and they can't operate together. So if I can defeat one or maybe cause attrition or whatever, that'll be good. Now, the problem is the English, most of these guys have some extra cash, so they can mitigate their supply rolls. And in particular, England, if they choose to bankroll anything, has $30 sitting with them. Of course, Holland has extra cash too that they could throw France's way. But in particular, you have Peter and Sobieski both trying to track down this one Swedish army and just not able to find it. But Estonia fell. We're cutting into Finland. It looks hopeless for the Franco-Swedes. It really does, unless something big happens, like Turkey joins in somehow. We're outside the first turn of the war. The initiative situation changes and it goes to the highest prestige. That's England at this point. So they control what's going to happen. In particular, they have to decide naval. I think they're going to allow the French and Swedes to go first. That way they get to react. Of course, that allows some privateering, but they can then hunt down any ships that are out there. Seems I kind of cheated with the French and Swedish fleets. You can't send a whole squadron out to do privateering. Only one fleet can do it at a time. One counter, as far as I can understand how they're describing it. The Swedes probably do not want to have their navy at risk, so they're just going to pull it back in that case. It made sense to do privateering when they're looking at even odds approximately for a fight. But it doesn't make sense to have their navy out there. It's not really protecting anything. The French Navy was, but the French Navy has been pretty much destroyed. All right, so for the first half of the fall turn, again, there weren't a lot of, I haven't done the sieges yet. There weren't a lot of engagements in the west. The Prussians attacked at Magdeburg again and lost, but they're winning the attrition war, essentially. They have more forces in this area than the Swedes do. The Swedes also have a problem. Their supply has been cut with the siege of Stralsund. They don't have anywhere that they can draw supply from. That's just a penalty to their attrition checks, but attrition causes you to melt away rather quickly until you're down to 1 unit. Then you can ignore it. These Prussians, I keep forgetting to use my navy to pull them out of there. That'll be an extra reinforcement available. For the Poles, they held both of these spaces because they were afraid of getting intercepted. Now, they can be intercepted just for standing there, but they figured if the Swedes fell out of the area they were in, then we could attack them, and they didn't succeed in an interception anyway. The Poles and Russians stayed here. The Poles defeated the Swedish army, and the Russians are allowing the Poles to take claim for the territory. I don't know who has rights to it. I'm assuming the Poles have some claim to it. If not, they're going to have to buy it because they do want the territory. No, they do not. They only have claims to some Russian territories. And likewise, I'm not sure the Russians have claims to Estonia. They do not. However, they don't really need that. They've got things that they do have claims to, in particular where St. Petersburg's to be built, that they can grab. So they may also allow Poland to lay claim to that. This is the danger to Sweden staying in the war now. Every turn that they don't surrender, their occupiers can start claiming their stuff. And it might be best just to get out before anybody actually lays claim to anything real. The Swedish army was defeated here. It retreated into non-friendly territory, which required an attrition check. Problematic, but it was the only place they could go to. And now we go to the Franco-Swedish alliance, see what they can do. The French still have a chance. It doesn't look good. I haven't rolled my sieges. Let's take those out. I don't know if they're at +1 or not. Uh-oh. Yeah. So Champagne fell. And we got to put a little marker to indicate the Spanish have temporary control. And the Prussians have a siege as well. Pretty sure they have artillery there. Doesn't help them. And the Russians have a siege. No idea if there's artillery, but it doesn't matter. Right, so we end the combat portion of my turn. I gotta find my tweezers. I don't know where I hid them as a bookmark. We're done with the military side. What happened? Well, again, sort of mixed results in terms of anything happening, but the big alliance is going to win this. The Spanish beat the French here. They withdrew. Turk Louis defeated the French here. They moved into the Spanish occupied area, but it's still French control, so they can move through it. And ended up being the ones to fight. They did an interception. They ended up being the ones to fight the French army. They beat it barely. Both sides actually took equal losses, but because of his leadership, he has a better morale, and the French decided to beat a retreat. They're basically looking at they can't really win this easily. What they're going to do is try to get out of it with as least pain as possible, maybe making try to cut a deal with one of the two alliances to get out of it. Sweden obviously wants to get out of the war they're in, their unit moved up here, but they didn't attack. They did succeed in taking Magdeburg, though. However, they're not going to get out scot-free. That's for certain. And the question then becomes, well, you know, what kind of price are people willing to pay? What kind of peace are we going to get to out of this? And given that everybody's kind of pissed at France for having defeated their attempt to, stomp on Holland, and these guys an attempt to stomp on Turkey, there's a lot of ill will. However, getting out of the war is a definite bonus, because then they can turn to those attentions that they had. They're probably not going to suffer too much from these. After going through the life and victory point base, I noticed France still had Colbert. He was supposed to disappear in 81, so he lived an extra 12 years beyond his test date without. Yeah, he certainly would have died during any of those peace turns that were recent. There may be others kicking around there. I don't think he's had an effect. And if it is, it's not that big a deal, right? Victory point wise, everybody's victory points moved towards 15. We got our scores here. Not surprisingly, Holland's at 288, Turkey at 275. The next biggest looks like it's Poland at 250. And we got people down in the 120s. One of the things that happens with a game like this, maybe not so much solitaire, but sometimes, because I do try to represent the same kind of play as I'm used to seeing in the groups that I'm used to having played with, is somebody falls behind, hundreds of points, where it doesn't look like they can come out of it. And they lose heart in trying to win by the victory conditions reasonably. I mean, they can't anymore. So then they start making up their own kind of goals in the game, which can be okay, but it can cause some serious issues. In EU, the game comes almost sealed in now. As soon as you've played it once or twice, once, as soon as you played the campaign once, you start looking and saying, there's no way certain people can win. There's nothing like that in this. There's no question that there's enough diplomatic freedom in this game that anybody could win if they're clever. Like in Pax Britannica, there are strong, maybe, incentives for one side or another, but it seems pretty clear that you can game this design. Still, if you fall far enough behind, what the hell are you supposed to do to enjoy yourself? And other players are going to have to kind of take that into account. Maybe, these guys who are far behind, if they're still far behind in, 80 years or so, they know they're not going to win. Well, they're going to start maybe not playing the victory conditions as much, which is okay, because to some extent, I think the victory conditions in this are going to generate a historical play anyway, so I'm not particularly wedded to following them. They do in EU and in Empires in Arms as well, both games that have similar systems. All right, let's get at least one more year on this. So we were largely through the event chits, and a lot of kind of, shaking events happened, public events happened at once. I was sure it was going to be a remix because I had to write lots of the stuff down. But it isn't. There's a pestilence in Russia, some natives uprose in Colombia, but that actually didn't have any effect. They failed to defeat the militia. There's an Irish revolt. Last time there was an Irish revolt, it got canceled. But this Royal Irish unit is actually now a revolting unit, even though it's out of Ulster. Well, let me make sure Ulster is part of Ireland. I don't know if I can figure that out easily. If it isn't, it goes back to the colonies, where Quebec fell at some point. And there's a commercial depression. Commercial phase, again, shaking things up here. Holland did the high competition again. And as, the French and Swedish ships are being removed, opportunities are opening up. You can see Holland's alone here. That's not because of just them. Actually, Sweden got removed from there. They're down to 1 again, which they don't even have on the board. In terms of payouts, well, France only paid $1 to try to prevent a prestige loss, and they were the guys with +2 to the die roll for being competed away, and they did not fail. England, though, and Sweden each lost 1. And we're beginning to see the trading fleets thinning out, especially with the privateering action having taken place. And that's going to just continue. There's going to be a lot of war profiteering here, which is why Holland made so much money. Nobody's picking off their fleets, and they have a lot of gain as fleets begin to decrease, which is why they want the high competition. And they may start turning around and building fleets again at some point. They don't really need to worry about it. You see, England gave up the tissues, textiles, whatever you want to call it, over in because that was their lowest potential earner. And they're looking at places where they're going to knock France off the board, perhaps. They're, going to improve their situation. So just because... What this does, though, is this removes some of their tax base. This is money. They were getting $2, but one of it went to the company and one of it went elsewhere. However, keeping the company in good shape against the Dutch commerce is a major, major concern. I'm going to see if the silver-tongued French can turn this around to something where they're not losing too badly from this war. I'm realizing my discontinuous way of playing made me miss the commercial depression. That's just me and my current style and state of mind where I can't really focus on anything right now. Anyway, I'm just going to let it stand. The hell with it. Entering the peace phase. Now, the peace would have happened last turn. Basically, the situation with the 3 Eastern powers, Austria, Poland, and Russia, declaring war on Sweden. Declaring war on France in order to hit Sweden. That was one of those misunderstanding type situations that could happen in a normal game, like in an opposed game. I've seen that kind of thing happen too often where, you think you've got everybody's agreement, and then, well, now, wait a minute, we didn't realize we could attack Sweden. Nah, the hell with that, right? So, that's what you could chalk it up to, other than just me not paying attention. Things like that do get lost when you're playing in opposed games, in the sense that, the optimal strategy or optimal agreements don't always get made, even if you think they're going to happen. So blunders like this war could happen. Anyway, France is going to have to seek peace, and Sweden as well, and it's not going to be good terms. Unlike EU, you're not constrained in peace in this. You can offer whatever level of peace, or your opponent, whatever, can offer whatever level of surrender that they desire. It might not mean much in the sense that, for example, claims aren't in place yet. So some territorial takeovers couldn't happen. However, I really doubt that many of these powers are too interested in a completely white peace. The question, though, is how much are they willing to kind of forego in terms of concessions in order to turn against the enemies that they really, really want to face. I can't see anything, though, less than a surrender, victorious peace, however you want to term it. It just depends on who's playing it, because we want some points off this. We'll see, though. This could drag out. It could be that France and Sweden say, you know what, especially if they can get one side to agree, it doesn't make a lot of sense to us to give, we're going to lose anyway. We're towards the bottom, France at least, of the lineup. At 122, there's nobody less than France. Ask how that happened, especially since I don't think they really lost that. Yeah, they won that first war against Spain, didn't they? Jeez, I don't remember. How did that go? Franco, Spain, Sweden. Jeez. Yeah, I think France must have lost. Yeah, France lost because Sweden was on the Spanish side. Okay. So France lost that first war, and that's why they're at the bottom here. Sweden's not in as bad a shape. They're actually in pretty decent shape. So they may be less interested in okay, the hell with you. I'm not gonna let you guys have a chance at winning on the sake that I already don't, But France may be looking at kind of I really went out of, I went out of this war and I'd love to recover, but I don't want out that badly. It's mistaken. See, there's two ways of handling things. There's disputed regions and there's claimed regions. And son of a bitch, I don't know what's going on here. So that's kind of the issue. Disputed regions can be annexed without a peace treaty. I'm not sure. They can be annexed through a peace treaty as well. So there is the Baltic, which may or may not be a special disputed region, which can be taken piecemeal. No, it can be. I don't know. Yeah, it's not a principality, which is key to this. Okay. So each territory has to be taken separately. So there's a lot of land claims here in terms of 5 territories that are claimed by the Russia-Turkish alliance. Sweden's going to have to give up some meat here. Now, this is how I have to cope with the rules. In the bad places, I have to have like 3 pages in view at once. Peace is a very complicated procedure in this game, one fraught with diplomacy in a way that Empires in Arms and EU don't really have. EU might have somewhere it breaks down into a fight, and maybe Empires in Arms as well, if I recall correctly, although it's not really specified how you do that. But in this case, in those, you generally have, okay, we have so many picks, we take them, right? And it's similar in this, but it's more complicated because there's a majority rules type application here. So right away, there's this territorial command in place, which is, okay, Russia definitely wants St. Pete. Poland wants something, and they'll take, Latvia up there as their due. And then there's one more possible land claim, which, let's see, here's my points. I've got 4 demands available. I can take 3 territories if I take the territorial demands. And so those are 2, and then there's 1 more up at play. Okay. Then I start thinking, well, probably Poland, Russia's willing to cede Poland this in exchange for, say, a major financial gain. And then between them, they're interested in a minor military reduction on Sweden to weaken it. That's more Russia's call, but Russia's going to get the money and the military demand in exchange for territory that Poland gets. Poland really wants the territory. Both sides would be interested in it, but that seemed applicable. Then I remember, who else is in this alliance? Poor Austria. And they've got one demand. One thing they want, which is a political demand to free the Lorraine. That's why they were in this war. And that's a problem because now that's one more shift in terms of types of demand. So we've got a territorial, we've got a political in place, and Austria is kind of like, you know, I'd like some of that cash too. I don't know how much but they really need cash. They're more cash starved than anyone else. That was kind of why Russia was leaning towards this. Now, it's possible for Poland and Russia to just say, hey, screw you, Austria. Here's your peace demand. If you don't like it, you can go sit on the sideline. But I think they're going to give them the Lorraine option. They may give them a slice of the money as well. That seems equitable, and they're not particularly in the mood to hose Austria here. They're going to need Austria perhaps in order to attack Turkey effectively. And they may make Austria pay the political price for that war. So, keeping good terms with them seems good. Anyway, that's kind of why I'm saying that there's this complex kind of web here that you can kind of untangle and do a lot of different things with. But compared to kind of the more straightforward little menu items from Empires in Arms or EU with the, hey, this is what you get if you can take it. And that's all there is to it. So I kind of spelled that out here. Estonia and Latvia are going to Poland. Let's take a look at the prestige of these. I'll deal with the income, which just gets added onto my chart as revenue per turn. But let's see if I can find the page I need. Oh, now we're at 4 pages. Huh? But no, that's not it. Let's see, page 8, page 9. Oh, this is page 10 here. It's kind of drifted out of. Uh-oh, and 11. Yeah. All right, so we're at 4 pages of stuff. So what we're doing here is going to be a victorious peace. And France and Sweden will accept that. All right. And we've got the demands in play. And now the territorial effect in terms of prestige. The prestige point is going to be 1 plus 1 per region value by value. Austria gets nothing out of this. Russia, I don't know what it. See, they're very hard to read. Iljori here, I think, is worth 1. This one's worth 1/2. I can barely see that. You can't. I can't get it into focus that close. Okay. So Russia's going to get a 1 tax area, which means they get 2 political points off that. We're going to see a lot of political points moving here. Okay. Poland gets 2 1-point regions, which is going to be 1. They're going to get 1 plus 2 is 3, I believe. And actually, Austria, I think, is in this piece, so they get a point, even though they're not getting a territory out of it. All right, total loss there was 3 territories, so that's 3 prestige, plus 1, that's 4 losses for Sweden. All right. The next is that we're doing a political demand to make Lorraine free, which is going to be 1 point gained by each of the powers, Poland, at the top now, Russia and Austria, and one lost by France. This was a demand on France. And now the financial demand. All right, this is the question. Who it hits? Well, we're more interested in taking money from France because they have a higher taxation. So we're going to hit them. Okay, so we're taking a major economic here. France may not accept that. Nah, Sweden is the one who agreed to this. This is a financial demand on Sweden. Okay, so that's going to be 1 prestige for Austria, Russia, and Poland. And they've agreed to divide it with a year for Austria and a year for Russia. And that's going to be 2 more losses for Sweden, as they're the ones taking the hit here. And now I have to record all that. And meanwhile, this was kind of agreed upon by the French and the Swedes as well. And it's kind of important because they can't go down, I think, below 5 voluntarily. So I don't think they can surrender. This is a problem with the game, where you can't surrender. I'm not sure I'm going to allow that. It may be kind of the reasoning between the optional rule that you can't refuse a surrender if you're below 5. You can't refuse a piece if it brings you below 5. Well, that's actually true. That's not an option, I don't think. Because you can't voluntarily do anything that brings you below 5. But the problem is, what if they both do, and I'm willing to let someone refuse? So chances are this would bring France below 5, and they couldn't refuse it, and they couldn't accept it. And they got to choose one. All right. So that's where we are, and then I record this, and then I go on to see if the other alliance can come to peace. The Franco-Swedish alliance thinks that it can still defeat the English, Spanish, and Prussians. And in fact, they're getting guarantees from Holland. Yeah, you're going to have trouble making your monetary needs, while Sweden's paying essentially 2 years' income over the next 3 years. Which, as long as we're at war, they'll be able to conceivably do, as long as there's a war going on. But, they actually have a desire to keep the war going for that purpose, because Sweden won't take the hit for that. And Holland's willing to fund them. Militarily, they're not in that terrible a situation. Yes, there's a big stack of English troops. Yes, the Prussians outnumber the Swedes right now. But that's not guaranteed to remain that way. Prussia can build more units than Sweden can more easily. I've got to fish through the units and see what was lost in that peace, because Sweden lost some of their, the Baltic ones, those can just be handed over to Poland. If I can find the Swedes, they're over here. They got these. So those have just become Polish troops, I believe. I don't know where the other Baltic unit is. I hope it's under one of the Polish stacks, because that's where it belongs. But in, up here, I can get rid of this. Up in St. Petersburg area, which I can't remember the name, it's Ilji or something like that. The Russians may be getting, almost certainly will be getting new units. I also have to look up about Russia when, I think it's not until 1700 that the reform happens. Anyway, we got out of that war without Peter getting to get rid of his bad first battle, right? So yeah, I was looking at, hey, are France and Sweden in a position where they want to ask for a white peace? And are they even willing to accept that? Because that would be the question. If they're not willing, they're in a good enough position where maybe they're not willing to accept that, and they made a quick roll. With Ireland in revolt and all kind of crappy stuff like that, they've got some nice leverage that they can use against the English. And with the Dutch saying, hey, you know what? You guys are helping me out. I'm going to help you out. I've got money. And that's what you really need with France in big debt and Sweden in their own, now they have their own different kind of debt, the war debt, debt from the peace conditions. So we're not going to get a second peace there yet, which is both good and bad. It means the war is going to continue. Now I have to keep worrying in the political phase because we've gotten through the peace treaties, but I have to look up declaration of war because one question is, we're not really set up for it, but at some point or another during this, we might well see the Polish, Austrian, Russian coalition move against Turkey if they can. Now, during a war turn, things are a little different. During a peace turn, you can declare war and then set up for the war. During a war turn, if you declare war, you're right in it. So I've got to get my borders fixed if that's the condition. So I've got more to look up and do. You can't initiate new wars once you're at peace until a new general peace turn has broken out. So that keeps the game from being continuous warfare. How reasonable it is, I don't know, because honestly, not this turn, but next turn, I could really see those countries turning and moving in. They've got their armies built up, etc. The problem is countries become kind of war weary, and once they get the peace, they don't want to immediately jump off to another war. Notably, the Dutch can't declare war on this Anglo-Spanish-Prussian alliance. It's kind of that's an open question whether they will or not, but they can't do it this turn. They have to form the alliance back here and before the peace was actually formalized. So they didn't do that for a number of reasons. So we have no minor country reactions, but we do have political control of minors that I have to go. For the remainder of the diplomatic phase, Spain laid claim to the Champagne. That's 3 prestige they spent on that claim. But the nice thing about it is it connects the Spanish road up so that it doesn't have to travel through the questionable territory of, say, Lorraine, or, well, actually that's the only connection it would have there. Of course, with Savoy in French hands, or French allied hands, it doesn't really exist. But I'm having so much trouble, connecting my Flemish territories, because there really are more than one. The old kingdom of Burgundy has to be put back together and made into something contiguous. Or to go further back, since it really does, that's what Lothar's kingdom, out of Charlemagne's sons. Essentially, that strip going up that caused so much trouble throughout the ages, although personally I think it's the mouth of the Scheldt. But anyway, that strip caused so much trouble throughout the ages. It all falls back to the old Burgundian inheritance, which falls all the way back to Lothar's original one of the 3 kingdoms and he was the emperor, actually, I believe. Okay, so we're heading into the royal phase here. Got to remember, for Russia to spend $4, assuming they have it, with their army dismantled, they probably should, but they've got some kind of plagues or something going on. They got to build St. Petersburg, and it's essentially, as soon as the fortress is built, that ceases to be a Baltic region, and it just becomes part of Russia for the rest of the game, which is a really huge bonus. Plus, it becomes a capital of Russia. That's not necessarily a bonus, because people can grab it and cost prestige, which I think I keep forgetting about. Not sure if anybody's lost a capital recently. I know early in the game I did that. I think when Paris fell, I think I forgot to do it for Vienna. But yeah, whenever a capital falls, you take a special penalty. So that claim of Champagne, why? Well, to connect things up so that I can better defend that. I'm kind of worried the way things are that I really am going to be constantly at war with France. And if that's as Spain, and if that's the case, well, I had better have it all hooked up in my hands. Work my way through the economic phase. A couple interesting observations have come up, especially around Sweden. Sweden doesn't have a lot of troop production. They made Prussia also doesn't. They have more than Sweden. Prussia asked England, hey, and Spain, how about you guys, support me? Not just cash. You support me. You raise more regiments for me. They can do that. They can support a country, but it means taking war debt, which essentially means victory points. At some point or another, you probably want to retire your war debt. If you choose to do so, you're going to be giving up prestige, and that's going to be losing victory points over the long term. England, though, really could handle a public debt. And in fact, if you're taking war loans out, that may not even translate into long-term public debt. So there's kind of a, come on, dudes. But the feeling is, well, you probably outmatch Sweden as it stands. You'll beat them eventually. I don't want to lose victory points for this. This is really a war to your favor right now. If things start getting tough, we'll call on you. Sweden, on the other hand, was able to get an agreement from France, but France said only if you also overproduce troops. And Sweden's like, well, okay, I'll overproduce one. Well, that didn't work out too well, and this is why I haven't been doing that much, because I tried it before and it failed. If you fail at that, it's not that you get revolts or something, you just don't get the troops. So they tried to build, instead of two, a third unit. In infantry, they built their 2 cav that they had lost, and they ended up losing 2 units because of it. They could have lost everything, everything new. So it's a crapshoot whether you get anything at all, and France is like, okay, that was probably not such a great idea now. I thought this helped. It doesn't. The subsidies, they don't count. They do count against your regular build limits. So I can't see any point for them. There's just too much money in the game. You can shift money, real cash money, instead. Granted, war debt may not turn into real debt, but the idea of taking on, 10 pounds of debt in order to subsidize, I can just hand you $2. I don't need this. I don't understand the subsidy rule. I thought it would get you around at least the mobilization limits, in which case actually Holland was going to do it for him instead of France. And at the end of the production, well, the French are trying to rebuild their army. The Swedes obviously kind of failed with theirs. Everyone else is in this kind of, I don't know. The Eastern powers now are going to be moving back into their non-wartime positioning so that they can spread their forces out. But the French are forced to spread out for the production. I actually didn't take any money from Holland. I'll be taking it for supplies, I'm sure. Nothing too exciting in the military phase act. Well, maybe, I don't know. It's hard to tell. Nothing too earth-shattering. Navally, almost nothing happened, and that's actually the problem. The Swedes they ran into Magdeburg here. They should have shipped some of their troops in. They have a decent-sized fleet here and pretty much control of the Baltic, with the English hiding out in East Prussia with their navy. Of course, because the English aren't here, they can't intercept anything, and they forced the Swedes and French to go first. So the Swedes could have pulled all their armies into place and made an invasion. In fact, they could have probably successfully invaded Schleswig and then launched an attack out of there. Over on the French front, things went kind of mixed, maybe better, maybe worse. A little bit of positioning here. The Spaniards were trying to force the French to a battle, even though they were numerically inferior, just because if this French unit collected up its forces, they would definitely be in trouble. And meanwhile, they're cutting forward here. They destroyed the unit here. Now, they did manage to catch it in a battle, and they managed to do, I think, 1 casualty, but they got wiped out. Meanwhile, the French army got wiped out here. English still not able to find the French, engage them here. and the French unable to win the siege. So far, none of the sieges have actually fallen, and we move into the fall. In this game, though, the problem, I'm looking at the fall turn, the problem with an invasion, which Sweden kind of needs to do, unless they're just going to try to slip by the English and land in France, is you have to leave your fleet out at sea while it's happening. The land phase comes after the ground phase, so you can't just land your troops, get your attack off, like in many games, and then, hey, it's a fait accompli. No, that fleet's sitting out there with the troops on board, which means the English will be able to intervene in it. As that stands, though, I think the Swedes have to take a chance on it and gather their forces for an invasion. Now, legally, I can't even do one the way I am, because you have to start with the forces. So the Swedes have more problems than it would look. I'm going to have to gather my forces together for the invasion. All right, on the ground. A little bit of dancing around here. The French have artillery. They couldn't quite reach it with the Spaniards with the artillery, and they don't want to go without it. So they allowed Spain to essentially capture 3 provinces here up to Languedoc. The Swedes gathering here, still under siege. No die roll succeeded there. The English were pushed out in Artois. Yet the French have not succeeded in either of their sieges. Sieges are hard. They are unlikely to actually go. But this was an exciting battle. The first round, the French did 2 casualties, I think. Maybe 3 to the English. I seem to remember the English were almost broken. Yeah, I think they did 3 casualties to the English, including a cab. And maybe took 1 themselves. The next 2 rounds, the French lost casualties and the English didn't. But, you know, I mean, we're talking Luxembourg here. He's not a bad leader. Basically, they were nobody had a plus in the battle, and they were equally matched essentially. So, the fact that the English were able to survive as long as they did after that first round was unlikely as hell. Then the next round, the English took another loss, and now they take another loss and they rout. Whereas the French were not yet ready to rout, and had they taken another loss at that same time, they would not have routed. They would not have been put in a broken position because they were the defending force. So the Brits decided to withdraw from that, and you know that costs the prestige. That's about it, really, other than time pressures. There's the time pressure of, is Holland going to enter the war? If they had won this battle decisively, well, then maybe the war would be over instead of Holland entering it. But there's a lot of threat going on that they're going to come in, and that's going to make things much, much uglier. For one thing, the Swedes can land and operate out of Dutch territories instead of trying to do an invasion. The big Dutch army, yeah, it's not big compared to the English army, and certainly not compared to the other continental armies, but it's big compared to the English army that's actually in the field. If you can see, they're fairly reasonable. Plus, we have a guaranteed... well, actually, the Dutch can't enter the war. I keep forgetting William is not without an assassination. So, yeah, the Dutch, there's no real great hope for the French. But they're kind of not losing the war. I know. They lost Paris. They lost southern territories. But militarily, they're not in terrible shape. Sweden's in pretty questionable shape, however. But who knows? Yeah, the Dutch aren't allowed to enter as long as William's King of England as well. Let's see, when does he go away? 1699. We're not going to last that long. All right, on to the end of turn stuff. And, you know, it didn't go that badly for the French and Swedes. They stayed in this because they thought Holland was going to come in. They probably could have gotten a white peace. They probably still can, actually. I don't know, because England can't enter the war they want with Holland. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that whole situation is really causing problems in terms of the diplomatic alliances. Now, you've got two separate players. I mean, there is an English player and a Dutch player. They're just restricted. The Dutch have a limited alliance with the English, and ouch. To deaths, the Turks got another Sultan, Mustafa II this time, and this was outside the normal death check. It was because he made his test date, so he had to check. They have a 1/3 chance in each case. In those cases, another person who first met their test date, and this is the big one, is Luxembourg is gone, which means the French lost their big general up here. They may have another 2-point general hiding somewhere. No, it doesn't look like it. They only have one general on the board, which, maybe they have to give out pensions or something. But that's an expensive proposition for a war that maybe doesn't have a lot of hope. I don't know.